Normally, thieves rob banks either by digging tunnels to get inside or by entering through the main gate and taking people hostage. But in this story, the thieves broke into two separate houses to rob banks and managed to pull off the biggest and most astonishing bank robbery in Ireland's history. This was a unique heist in which not a single shot was fired, no one was injured, and the gang quietly made away with £30 million, after which they vanished forever. The police tried every possible way to investigate and used every trick in the book, but they never caught them. So let's head into a story where a perfect robbery was carried out, and a brilliant investigation went on for 20 years. Yet in this game of cops and robbers, the robbers won and the police lost. The story begins on the night of December 19th, 2004, when there was a knock at the door of a man named Kevin McMullen. Kevin was the manager at Northern Bank in Ireland, and as soon as he opened the door, he saw two men dressed in police uniforms. One of them told Kevin that one of his relatives had met with an accident and he needed to come with them to identify the body. Hearing this, Kevin panicked, and as soon as he stepped out of the house, one man put a gun to the back of his head, while the other went inside and covered the mouth of Kevin's wife, Karen, so she couldn't scream. Meanwhile, 20 kilometers away, a similar incident was unfolding at another house where Chris and his entire family were taken hostage. Chris was also an employee at the Northern Bank, and he watched helplessly as his family was held at gunpoint. After capturing them, the kidnappers told Chris to quietly follow their orders, or they would kill his family. Kevin and Chris had no idea that over the next 24 hours, they would become part of a plot that would shake the entire UK and make them key players in the biggest robbery in Ireland's history. That night, Chris Ward was at his home in Belfast, watching a football match with his parents and girlfriend, when there was a knock at the door. As soon as he opened it, the man outside said he had come to talk about Celtic, a football club in Ireland and Chris's favorite team, which he supported as part of a fan group. Because of this, people often came to his house to talk about tickets or matches. In seeing the man, Chris thought it was the same this time. That turned out to be his biggest mistake. Chris let the man in, and as soon as he turned around, two more men entered. Everything changed instantly. The three men drew their guns and aimed them at Chris and his family, telling him they weren't there to talk about football, but about his job as a cashier at Northern Bank. They told him they knew everything about him and that for the next 24 hours, he would have to do exactly as they said, while his family would remain hostage in the house. One of the kidnappers then told him to put on his work uniform, quietly leave the house, and get into the car waiting outside. Chris did exactly as told. Outside, an engine was running and the door was open. He was told to lie down on the back seat. In the front sat a driver holding a gun in one hand. The same thing had happened to Northern Bank manager Kevin, who had been sitting at home with his wife Karen watching TV when there was a knock at his door. When he opened it, he saw two police officers who told him about the accident, and then everything happened just as I already told you. Meanwhile, Kevin's wife. After covering Karen's mouth, she saw a third man enter the house. The three kidnappers then took Kevin and his wife to their bedroom, turned them to face the wall, and held guns to their heads. One of them told Kevin to forget, for now, that he was the manager of Northern Bank, and to only remember that he needed to save his wife. Meanwhile, the other two kidnappers began wiping down every corner of the house to remove any fingerprints. An hour later, one of them told Karen she would be moved to another house where a woman would take care of her. They then blindfolded her, took her outside, and put her into a car. Kevin could only stand there helplessly, watching her being taken away. After the two separate kidnappings, Karen was driven to an unknown location. Kevin, completely unaware that the same thing had happened to his bank's cashier, Chris, waited anxiously. Soon, a car stopped outside Kevin's house, and Chris was brought in and held hostage alongside him. Kevin and Chris's hands were tied, and they were locked in the dark kitchen, unable to see each other's faces clearly. One kidnapper told them that if they cooperated, their families would remain safe, but if they didn't, their families would be killed. He went on to explain that they planned to rob Northern Bank and that Kevin and Chris would have to help, following every instruction they were given. The kidnappers warned them that they must do exactly as told and that even a single mistake would mean the death of their entire families. Kevin now realized the situation was extremely serious. This was not just a kidnapping, but part of a plan to rob a bank. And both he and Chris were now caught up in it. With their families already taken hostage, the first stage of the plan was complete, and it was time to move to the next step. These kidnappings are also known as tiger kidnappings, and they were nothing new for Northern Ireland. In tiger kidnappings, two crimes are involved. First, an important person is kidnapped, and then they are forced to commit a crime while being held hostage. This method is a common tactic used by organized crime groups and is still occasionally used in Ireland today to rob banks and even homes. To counter such tiger robberies, Northern Bank had implemented a security measure a few years before this heist. They installed a feature in their deposit vault so that no one could open the vault door alone. It required two people to be present at the same time. The door opened with a password, and both the password and the two designated people changed daily. On the following day, the two people assigned to open the vault were Chris and Kevin. Locked in the kitchen, Kevin and Chris were waiting for further instructions when a man entered and handed each of them a mobile phone. On the back of each phone were the initials of their names, followed by the letter C, and each phone had only one number saved, a number that would later change the entire story. After giving them the phones, the man told Kevin and Chris to sit on the couch and began explaining the plan. This man was the gang's leader, holding a knife, while the rest of the members communicated with each other only through signals. The leader laid out exactly what they had to do, when and how, repeatedly reminding them what would happen to their families if they disobeyed. According to trial records, this conversation lasted for several hours, and the kidnappers knew every single detail about the bank, from its employees to the exact times when the security shifts change. Continuing, the gang leader told Kevin and Chris that they would go to the bank the next day, just like any normal workday, and act completely normal while doing their work. They were then to go down to the basement vault, take out £1 million in cash, put it in the bag the gang would provide, and drop that bag near a bus stop. After placing the bag, they were to return to the bank and trigger the alarm. During this entire process, they were required to keep the mobile phones given to them by the gang switched on at all times. The reason for this was that the kidnappers would give them further instructions while they were inside the bank, and they also feared Kevin and Chris might alert the police, which could get them caught. The way the gang leader spoke terrified Kevin and Chris, and both silently agreed to do exactly as he said. By now it was around 2 a.m., when the gang leader told them to get some sleep because the next day would be huge. The next morning at 11 a.m., Kevin and Chris got into a car and headed for the bank. Chris's shift started at 11:30 and Kevin's at 12. On normal days when it wasn't his turn to open the vault, Chris worked as a supervisor overseeing the transfer of banknotes to other banks and ATMs. Millions of pounds passed through his hands daily, but today was different. Only 5 days remained until Christmas, meaning a much larger volume of cash was moving in and out of banks. Acting normal, Kevin and Chris entered the bank and sat in Kevin's cabin, passing the time until 5 p.m., when the robbery was set to begin. Before that, they were instructed to make 3 separate calls to the kidnappers. The purpose of these calls was to confirm everything was on track and to remind them repeatedly that any slip-up would cost their families' lives. At around 4:30 p.m., Kevin told the bank staff that there was a discrepancy in the cash balance and that he and Chris needed to count the money themselves. The rest of the staff were sent home early, leaving only Kevin, Chris, and 2 security guards in the bank. At exactly 5 p.m., they began. They first went to the underground basement where the vault was located, entered the password on the keypad, and stepped inside. The vault was filled with cash, pounds, euros, and dollars, but they headed straight for the green boxes containing freshly printed pound notes. These boxes were sealed with metal security seals, and the gang leader had given strict orders to replace them with white plastic seals, the reason for which would become clear later. Kevin also knew about a blind spot in the vault where he could fill the bag without being seen by the cameras. They took the green boxes off the shelf, moved to the blind spot, and began stuffing the cash into the bag provided by the kidnappers. The total amount placed inside was £1 million in 50 and 100-pound notes. It took about 15 minutes to fill, and Chris immediately picked up the bag and left the vault. With no one else in the bank, his path was clear. Now Chris had to make one final call to the kidnappers to find out where to deliver the bag. After the call, he left the bank, walked to a nearby bus stop, placed the bag there, and waited. Within 3 minutes, a car pulled up. Without asking any questions, Chris handed the bag to the man inside and quietly returned to the bank. The last thing Kevin and Chris had to do was trigger the bank's alarm and return home. But they had no idea a much bigger scheme was waiting for them. On the way back, Chris felt relieved, thinking he would finally reunite with his family, when suddenly his phone rang. On the other end was the gang leader, who tells him, "You did exactly what you were told." Chris then asks, "Now what?" And the reply he got made his blood run cold. The gang leader told him to go back into the vault and take out the rest of the cash. At that moment, Chris realized this robbery would happen in multiple stages, and this was only the beginning. When Chris asked, "How much more cash?" the gang leader replied, "All of it, every bit of cash in the bank." Before continuing the story, it's important to understand how this northern bank received its cash. The bank's rear entrance, which opened into an alley leading directly to Wellington Street, was used for all cash deliveries and collections. Every banknote came and went through this alley. The company responsible for transporting the cash was called Secure Limited. The thieves' plan was to bring a van into that alley, load it with the green boxes full of cash, and escape. The catch? Kevin and Chris had earlier replaced the metal seals on the cash boxes with white plastic seals. In banking terms, a white plastic seal meant the box contained waste paper, not cash. This was the second stage of the plan. Disguise the real cash boxes as waste boxes and move them out the back entrance, where a white van would be waiting. The problem was that only secure agency vans, driven by verified employees with official IDs, were allowed into the alley. When Chris told the gang leader it was impossible to move the cash out of the bank, the leader threatened him. "You run the bank. If you want to see your family alive, you'll find a way to get the cash out." As soon as the call ended, Chris went back into the bank and headed straight to the vault, where the green boxes were kept. There were 30 boxes, each containing £1 million, a massive sum to smuggle out unnoticed. Kevin and Chris began loading 6 boxes each onto 5 trolleys. One by one, they wheeled the trolleys from the vault through the hall and past the security control room, where 27 cameras were recording everything. Before they could move the boxes outside, Kevin needed a clear exit. He went into the control room and told security guard Billy that a van would be arriving at the rear alley to take away boxes of waste paper, so he needed the rear door opened. Billy suspected nothing and opened the rear gate, but as per protocol, he accompanied them to the gate. The path was now clear. Kevin pushed the first trolley through the gate into the alley, while Chris quietly called the gang leader to tell him all the boxes were in the alley and he could bring the van. Within 15 minutes, a white van reversed into position and parked flush against the bank's gate. The rear doors opened and 2 men stepped out, the ones who would take all the cash. Billy, Kevin, and Chris stood by as the 2 men began loading the boxes into the van. In just 7 minutes, all 30 boxes, worth £30 million, were inside. After loading, one of the thieves handed Chris a roll of black plastic bags, explaining they would be coming back for the final stage of the robbery. Kevin and Chris went back into the vault. Kevin's phone rang. The gang leader told them to put all the remaining US dollars and euros into those black bags. In the first 2 stages, the thieves had taken freshly printed pounds. In the third stage, they took used banknotes, dollars, and euros. About 45 minutes later, the van returned to the alley, and at that moment, guard Billy called Kevin, tells him the van has arrived, and Kevin's anxiety spikes. This time, there were no boxes to hide the cash in, only black plastic bags stuffed with millions in dollars and euros. Kevin tells Billy to open the back gate, but he's terrified that if Billy decides to check the bags, their entire operation will be ruined. Chris and Kevin load the bags onto a trolley and head toward the back door, where Billy's waiting. To their relief, Billy doesn't inspect the bags. Once again, 2 men step out of the van and quickly begin loading the black bags. Billy has no idea they're full of cash, and it's all happening right in front of him. When the last bag is loaded, one of the thieves tells Kevin and Chris, "You can go now." And just like that, the biggest bank robbery in Ireland's history is complete. The 2 still need to trigger the bank alarm to make it seem they had no part in the theft. They then get into a car and head to Kevin's house so he can reunite with his family. At around 8:10 p.m., Kevin calls the police station, claiming a gang had kidnapped his family and forced him to rob the bank. But the police already knew about the robbery. A couple walking past the alley earlier had noticed the white van and sensed something was wrong. They spotted a traffic officer nearby, told him everything, and he passed the information to the police. By the time the call reached headquarters, the van was gone. When investigators arrived at the bank, they were shocked. 30 million pounds was missing. A nationwide search began. Months later, police arrested several suspects in hopes of reaching the robbers. 2 men were caught at Dublin's Euston station, one carrying €100,000 hidden inside a washing powder box, and the other accused of burning banknotes in his backyard. That second man was none other than bank manager Kevin McMullen. The money he was burning had been given to him by the same gang that had forced him to rob the bank. Police had long suspected an inside job, given how clean and easy the theft had been. Since Kevin was one of only 2 people with vault access, he was arrested and jailed for a year on charges of helping execute the UK's largest bank robbery. But after a year of interrogation and investigation, police still couldn't find a single piece of evidence linking him to the crime. No suspicious calls, no footage of him taking money out of the bank. Nothing. Eventually, he was released. The focus then shifted to Chris, who had been working alongside Kevin during the robbery and had scheduled their shifts so they could open the vault with the password. On January 29, 2006, Chris was arrested on suspicion of aiding the robbers. His house was searched, but again, no evidence was found. Although he was put on trial, prosecutors had no proof he had deliberately set the shift schedule for the robbery. Chris, too, was released. Police then searched 22 locations and arrested 13 more people. But still, the robbers remained out of reach. Those arrested were charged with money laundering or other unrelated crimes. To this day, neither the stolen money nor the thieves have ever been found. Kevin and Chris's families were left unharmed after the robbery. Chris's family was held captive in his own house, while Kevin's wife was locked up in a cabin deep in the woods. There was no one to look after her, even though she had been told a woman would stay with her, and the robbers burned her car so there would be no evidence leading the police to them. The Northern Bank robbery wasn't just a theft. It was a slap in the face of the police, with $30 million stolen. Families were taken hostage, and 2 bank employees were forced to rob the bank. Yet the robbers vanished forever. The police had just one job: to find them. But they failed miserably, and to this day the case remains unsolved. How did you like this story? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.